In the prosecution's closing argument, we heard repeated claims that George Zimmerman exaggerated and flat out lied when he told police he shot in self-defense. The prosecutor, Bernie Della Rianda, zeroed in on specific points, showing jurors the video of Zimmerman's reenactment that he did for police and disputing his claim that he got out of his truck to check the street sign.
Did you catch him in one lie right there? He originally told the police over and over, before and even after this interview, he didn't know the name of the street. And then when they just kind of let him talk, he gives the name right there. I mean, it's common sense. There's only 3 streets, and he's lived there 4 years. Again, why did he have to lie about that? Because he does not want to admit that he was following this innocent young boy.
All right, let's bring back our panel. You see Jeffrey Toobin, Martin Savage, Sonny Hostin, and Jose Baez. Martin, this notion that he was repeatedly lying, what did you make of that?
Well, these would be called inconsistencies, of course, by the defense. One of the aspects that is rather unique to this particular case was that George Zimmerman has made so many recorded statements. A number of them, of course, were police interviews. Other ones were the reenactment that he did, but then he also went on television. So they, meaning the prosecution, have used those over and over because each time they've played it, they've highlighted where the story might have changed subtly. Now, the prosecution will say these are big changes, and they point out that George Zimmerman cannot keep his story straight, hence he must be lying. The defense would say, look, nobody gets their story told the same way each particular time. But it was effective, I would say, in the courtroom today because it was time after time shown over what was a period of 2 hours versus what had been 9 days in the original presentation of the state's case.
Jose, how effective was that?
Well, I think it was to a limited extent. The
what?
I just don't. The way the entire presentation was laid out, I just think it was flawed. And if you have the situation where you have all of these inconsistencies and you have all these statements, you already know what you're working with. And here's the problem with the way it was presented. Now, Bernie's an excellent lawyer and a very experienced lawyer, but why not show them if he's off by just a little, or if that jury remembers things just a little bit differently, it's going to work against him, and they may disregard the entire the arrest of his inconsistencies.
I think it's a fair point, Sonny, and I'm anxious to get your sense because a lot of people have noticed that in the case of the prosecutor in his closing arguments, he kept raising questions, basically saying to the jury, you decide. He has to prove beyond a reasonable doubt the guilt of George Zimmerman. Usually it's the defense that tries to raise questions, to raise questions about beyond a reasonable doubt. Did you notice that that repeated theme? He was saying he would ask, say something, raise a question, say to the jury, you decide.
That was very effective, and it was intentional. It's a theme that I've used often in trial. He was letting the jury know that they decide what the facts are that they believe. They decide what their memory controls, because you got to understand that tomorrow the defense is going to put on this cartoon reenactment of what they believe happened, and sort of pushing that narrative, pushing that down, those facts down the jurors' throats. So this prosecutor wants to let them know, listen, I'm not trying to push any facts on you. These are the inconsistencies. Ladies, you decide. And I've got to tell you, they're going to go back into the jury room, and it's very effective because I've used it, and that's why he did it in that fashion. It may seem like it was meandering, and it may seem like it wasn't as linear as it could have been, but it was intentional, and I think that folksy style that Bernie has is effective.
But why not say it that way? It may be. You laid it out perfectly. Why couldn't he have?
Well, Jeffrey, I want to get your thought also. There was a lot of, we bleeped it out, and other networks, television networks, didn't bleeped out all of the F-bombs or whatever that were used, the N-word that was used. The viewers who were watching it live on CNN, they didn't hear that, but the jurors did, and he didn't shy away, Bernie Della Rianda, at all from some of the language that George Zimmerman allegedly used, or at least used on some of those recordings during the course of this investigation. How effective was that?
you know, look, that's evidence in the case, and he used it. I think jurors are grown-ups. I think they know that people use swear words. I don't think people are terribly shocked by it in this day and age. And I also think that rhetorical questions can sometimes be very effective ways of arguing, and certainly he was doing a lot of that today. The problem I've always had with the prosecution in this case is they haven't clearly answered the question of what happened, in what order, who did what when. Yes, you know, you can point out that George Zimmerman told things slightly differently, but what's your version, prosecutors? How did this happen? Where did he walk? What did he do when? And I think that's a big problem. If you were trying to prove what happened, you got to show what happened.
Martin, you want to weigh in on that point?
Well, I think you're exactly right, that we've seen an evolution, and maybe that's being kind, as to what the prosecution has said. And the introduction of the dummy actually is an interesting way that we watch this. Because, of course, initially it was said that it was George Zimmerman who was on top. It was George Zimmerman who was the aggressor. It seemed that with the introduction of the dummy, it was used yesterday, it was used again today, that no, the story is now different, that in fact it appears that it was Trayvon Martin who was on top. But there is a reason that he may have been pulling away, and that is because he saw the gun and was now trying to get away from a man who was armed and shot the teenager. So this story and the way it has evolved, I think, does raise some questions of what exactly happened here. Are you adapting the prosecution to fit the case as it moves, or is there one solid storyline from front to back?
Yeah, this is the second day in a row the prosecutors had Trayvon Martin on top. Earlier, they said George Zimmerman was on top. I'm going to play that clip of what Bernie De La Rianda did with that dummy when we come back. Also, we aren't, of course, allowed to see the jurors on television, but Sunny Hostin, she was in the courtroom. She watched them very closely. She's going to tell us how they reacted, plus how the prosecution used Skittles and other pieces of evidence to try to humanize Trayvon Martin. Stay with us. You're in the Situation Room.